Ready.
Oh, yeah, that would be a good idea.
I don't care.
Okay. Let's record.
All right, we're recording. Excellent. All right, so I will now call to order the regular meeting of the Elderly and Disabled Tax Fund Committee. Today is Thursday, May 9th, 2024. The time is 4 p.m. This is a hybrid meeting, which is being recorded on Zoom for later playback on the Town of Dayton homepage and YouTube. Please stand and join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, so the first item on our agenda is to review, discuss, act the approval of the April 11th, 2024 meeting minutes. Did everybody get a chance to review those minutes?
That I was able to do.
Excellent, perfect. Did anybody have any questions, corrections, or anything of that nature?
Comment, I guess, is how they were sent. Okay,
They look great.
okay, because I did get a format that was sent from Kevin Smith.
Okay.
And I thought it was a good format. I just want to make sure. I know I've seen different kind of meeting minutes, so if this wasn't ideal, obviously we could change it, but
No, I thought they were great.
I wanted to get a census from
I
it.
like the format, and it's the format that we were using COD, passed on. So it is a really good format. The only thing I would ask in the future is, and this is really for me for listening purposes.
Yeah.
And for reminder purposes, is if we make a motion to, if we say, you know, like it said here, we're gonna all look into looking at revising the application and think about ways we can do it and so forth.
Okay.
But if there was anything that any of us are gonna do specifically, because there was something I was gonna do, for example, to look into some rates for persons with disabilities, things like that. If we could just say Jonathan will look into, or Paul will look into.
I did do that on some, but there were some things I must have
Okay.
missed, because I
No.
did write specifically how Paul will look up the treasurer's group email
Yes,
with other towns, so I must have missed
Okay.
that specific
okay,
part.
that's more of a reference point for me, otherwise I thought
Yeah.
it was so easy to listen to, which was awesome.
Awesome.
So, not everything flows when you listen to it,
No, for
but just
sure.
flowed like a straight Word document, which was great, so.
Okay.
Good.
All right, so if the,
I'll make a motion that we approve the minutes from April.
is there a second?
I will second that.
All right, motion made and seconded. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
I,
Aye.
Aye. All right, carries unanimously. So to review our old business, is to review, discuss, act, to review and or develop eligibility guidelines, application window, or minimum maximum award amounts. So I know we all kind of had some homework assignments.
yes.
So I put out some feelers with the Mass Collector Treasurer Association. I haven't heard back from any that, ironically, that have well-established running programs, but a lot of towns, this has become a hot topic, and many towns are actually just in the infancy of establishing it.
Oh, okay.
So ironically, of the 3 or 4 people I heard from, they were all even more in their infancy than we are. They were looking to us for pointers.
Okay.
But it's a good, I guess it's signs of the times, right? That
For
there-
sure.
that there's more need in the community, and
Absolutely.
it's, you know, it's broader than just Dayton.
Yeah,
Which, you know, just kind of further reinforces the importance of what we're doing.
absolutely.
Does anybody want to kick us off with anything that they've looked into?
So I was looking at some of the US Census material, and I was focusing on persons with disability and income is what I was trying, and I was trying to print it out and it wouldn't print out. Kim was actually, that's why she drove me here. She was trying to help me print it out and it wouldn't, for whatever reason, it wouldn't print. But, so I may have to just send it to all of you.
Okay.
But what I was looking at was census material, and I was breaking it down by county and then trying to break it down by town and age and with population and financials, what percentage of our seniors, for example, fall under the poverty guideline of 100%, 120%, 150%, like that, to give us an idea. And in Dayton overall, what I will say is that for people over 60, we have about 35% of our population that falls within the poverty guidelines. Which is 35, which is quite high comparatively. It's not surprising because if you think of it, it's not until recently where I hate to put it this way, we've become more of a white collar community. For a long time, we were a blue collar community where unfortunately wages were lower. So people who've lived here for a long time are going on lower incomes, lower pensions, in a lot of cases, Social Security. So I'm not surprised at that, but that's one thing that we just want to keep in mind, is that the numbers for who potentially could qualify are relatively high.
Right.
I did also reach out to Ray a couple of times, Ray Hayes, because I wanted to get numbers from veterans, on veterans over 60 and veterans that he thought were even 55 who have disability or might qualify. And he said he'd have to do some homework on that and get back to me, and I haven't heard back yet.
Okay.
So stay tuned for.
Thank you for reaching out.
No, that's,
For Ray, but I wanted to, because Woody raised a fair point. I think it was
Absolutely.
fair for what he raised there. And lastly, but not leastly, and you may have heard talk about this too, Paul, in your role here or not, but there are a couple of proposals making their way through the legislature. And I found this out, I'm on another task force for the state, which is called Grandparents Raising Grandchildren, which is also connected to programs like senior centers here. And
Yep.
we can talk about that another time. But having said that, one of the things that we were talking about in the task force yesterday was there is an effort being introduced legislatively to do two things which could affect some seniors in Dayton. And one is to lower the age of qualification for circuit breaker by 2 years. The second one is to increase the amount of qualification for circuit breaker by $200. And the last thing is to lower the age further for grandparents who are guardians or foster parents raising grandchildren.
To increase, what was it?
To increase the circuit breaker allowance.
Okay,
And while that doesn't directly affect what we do, what it means is if the circuit breaker figures are increasing, potentially there could be a couple of fewer people who might qualify.
right.
That
is
otherwise
kind of
would qualify.
Potential future
Exactly.
numbers, absolutely.
So just, that's down the road, obviously, but I would just say stay tuned for all of that. And I'm sure in your position, you'll hear more about that before I do.
oh, I'm sure it'll be in the DLS
you know,
updates
so-
fairly soon if it's not already, absolutely.
So yeah, just keep it in mind. So that's it. That's what I have.
Okay. Do we want to go kind of around or
Yeah, no,
each person? So do you want to go next, Paul?
sure. So included in the packets, and I apologize that I didn't send these attachments sooner, I reviewed a couple, because really, as we drill down the things that I think we're gonna want to pretty soon put some kind of quantitative numbers on, and I really appreciate the research that you did about the poverty level in seniors. That's very valuable. I was digging around to the census, but I didn't get as deep as that.
When I get it, I'll forward it to all of you so that
Thank you.
we're on the same
I
page.
do have poverty guidelines here, if that, I don't know what you pulled up, Jonathan, but I just pulled up, quick, if you need number wise, we do have that.
Perfect. So I was thinking that at least the 5, there may be more, but just 5 points that jumped out to me as things that we'll want to start to develop parameters around are age, income, length of residency, if we want that to be included. It doesn't have to be, but we could. Any additional preferences, such as veterans preference?
Yep.
And the degree of verification that we're going to want to do, like what documents.
Oh, okay,
We're
yep.
gonna
What
require.
exactly.
Yep.
So I know that there is a warrant article on the annual town meeting to lower the elderly exemption age down to 65.
Yep.
We don't have to commit to making any decisions now, but it might help us with uniformity if we were to consider making 65 the cutoff rather than 70 or 62.
Right.
I included in the attachments, I included
Can I ask
the,
a quick question?
please, thank you. Bill Mort, new chairman of the Board of Assessors, joining us now as one of our statutory.
Hi, Bill.
Yay, that's a great title. Thank you. Job I love. That was sarcasm. You probably can't see it. So I just want to ask, what do we believe is the purpose, or how should I say, where does this fund, this committee lie? Is it, so right now we have a senior tax exemption that goes through the Board of Assessors, and it provides an exemption for people, low income people who are seniors. Is the purpose of this fund to be in addition to that fund, or in addition? So in other words, they get the senior tax exemption and then we add to it? Or is it supposed to be a situation where all of these people don't quite make it into the qualifications for the senior tax exemption? What is the target audience, I guess, is my basic question.
That is a great question, and I think the answer is either or both. There are no statutory requirements on who can receive the funds besides that they are elderly or disabled persons of low income. The statute does not define those things, so we as a local committee are able to come up with our own criteria. They may differ from the Board of Assessors, but I think for clarity purposes, at least if we were to kind of consider them as a jumping off point, I think that would be a good idea. So essentially, to answer the question, and please tell me if I don't answer the question, is someone is not necessary, a person who receives an exemption could receive a distribution or an allowance or whatever we're going to call it here. You also could have somebody who does not qualify for an exemption, but does qualify under these guidelines. So they're not required to be, we don't require, or they're not statutorily required to require them to also qualify for an exemption. So we could have income guidelines that are stricter. We could have them that are looser. No, I'm sorry, Laura.
No, I was gonna make a comment too, because obviously this hasn't been approved at town meeting yet. I'm assuming it'll get approved, but we don't know. But one thing I did note on some of the attachments you sent, and also some of the previous ones we received from Kevin when we were first kind of grouping together, I noticed that Harvard, the town of Harvard is 65, and we in town consider, at least on the Council on Aging side, a senior or elderly. We service anybody 60 and older. So I didn't know if we wanted, what we would want to maybe keep it uniform or not uniform with the assessors. If it does get approved for 65, do we want to also do 65, or do we want to be uniform with Council on Aging numbers for 60 and older, where it could help those people in that 5 years of between 60 and 65 that are low income and considered elderly on a Council on Aging standpoint, who might not get an assessor's break because they're not 65 yet. It might be beneficial to do that, so that we could potentially, on some of these applications, and I don't want to go too far because I think that's, I have a lot of notes, but further down there are notes about, did you already receive exemption in some way, shape, or form through, say, the assessors or in a different outlet for your property tax? So if there's an area where it says we would take priority to those who have not received any other exemptions yet. So if we look into all these other different ideas, it might be, personally, I would favor 60 and older for those people in that weird leeway of not being able to get a bigger break. And we're not talking that we looked at what we have for funds, and
Right.
I mean, we don't know what will roll out over the next few years with donations, but I think it's just a really tough time right now, and if we can help people who aren't able to reach those other levels, it might be a good thing for the town and townspeople.
So
The
this
other
was,
side of it, though, if I can interrupt and just finish that thought too a little bit, is, for persons with disability, this is also for persons with disability.
Yes.
Right.
But it doesn't
Not required.
define a person with disability as having to be a senior.
Right.
Right.
So if they're a senior who's not identified as a disability, then that, for example, that age 60 threshold or 65 threshold might hold. If they're a person with a disability, we can't say they have to be 60 or 65, but they
Right.
would have to have a defined disability according to the Americans with Disabilities Act, as far as I'm thinking at least. So the other part of this is we have, as you know, we have very limited funds in the account, I think a little over $3,000 right now. So part of the goal is to advertise this more through the mailers that go out with the tax bills and make it a little bit clearer if we can, but knowing that we're going to be putting limitations on the maximum amount that person might be able to get. It might be $100, $150, $250 at the maximum or something like that. And it's not going to be necessarily either be year after year after year. This is for special, unusual circumstances. So the goal is not to have people constantly coming back to the well, and I hate to put it that way, but to really help somebody out who normally when we look at their tax bills, they do everything they can to make ends meet. But this year, for whatever reason, they just can't do it. And they know we're there. They might or might not qualify for one of the other types of things that we talked about. And they're just asking for enough to get them over the top so they can have peace of mind and sleep at night. That's really what I think we're trying to accomplish.
So I think I'd like to speak to both of what both of you just said. First of all, I think it's important that you refer everybody to the Board of Assessors first, because we also have a hardship. It's not just we have a disability exemption, we have a blindness exemption, a hardship exemption, senior. There's all sorts of different things that we can do to reduce their tax burden. But what I want to get at is that what you said is that there is not very much money in this account. And if our goal is to help the, shall I say, neediest people, okay, we had 35 seniors. I'm just sticking with seniors to keep it simple. I'll include, I include disabled as well, but for the sake of discussion, I'm only talking about seniors here. So the seniors, we got 35 people last year that qualified to get this exemption, the senior tax exemption. And if our criteria is going to be, shall we say, the most needy people, it's going to be those same 35 people. This was the reason for my question at the beginning: is this supposed to be in addition to what the Board of Assessors is bringing? Or is I think Laura just said, something to the effect of, did you get an exemption from the Board of Assessors, and that's going to be a qualifying factor or a disqualifying factor? I actually think that might make more sense.
It wasn't listed on I don't want to go through each note yet.
It's actually
but-
the first question on the Westboro questionnaire.
Yes,
Is,
on
have you applied
Westboro.
for any real estate tax exemption for the current fiscal
And
year?
I can't remember if it's Concord Harvard yet, but I think that's an important factor for both elderly and disabled
Oh,
to know.
absolutely.
And then on top of this, Bill, I know you weren't here for the last meeting, but we did discuss having the application process start at the assessor's office regardless. We didn't have an assessor member at that time, so I agree with you there. I think that would be the most beneficial, because maybe they're applying for this, but they might qualify for a bigger break through what the assessor's already offers. So we were kind of already discussing that would be the first stop and where the applications would be anyway, just to keep it a little more resident friendly, to not send them here, there, and everywhere. And I mean,
Yep, and to be clear, I think it's highly underutilized is the hardship exemption. If somebody is truly having, I think we only granted like 2 or something in the past year. If somebody's genuinely having a problem, they lost a job, they're medical issues or whatever, if they come to us and they show us, exactly the sort of stuff, we're looking at on this form, that, they can't make ends meet. We customarily, we've kind of set it at $1,000. So we give them $1,000. I think if we had a really, really sad case, we could make an argument, because 1,000 is arbitrary. We could wipe out their entire tax if we wanted to. But of course that costs the town. So, we try to balance, the town's interest with the people's interest. So I think that needs to be utilized first. And so I love the idea of going to the Board of Assessors first. We can find whatever exemptions that we can get for them. And I suggest that after that process, if they don't succeed, then could go to this committee.
Right, that's kind of the idea of it all. That was the
Absolutely.
idea
Yep.
of it.
That's one of the reasons that we're grateful to have you on the committee, I think, is because that's gonna help us with the flow chart from a process perspective.
Yeah, the amount of applications coming in won't be, the idea is that they won't be as much based on
Right.
them hopefully
Starting that
qualifying for other.
A lot of
other
these folks will
grades.
be pre-qualified on the basis of need by the time they make it to us. If they
Yeah.
were to
Right.
start with
But
these-
Bill, when somebody applies for hardship, for example, you said 2 people applied last year. Is there an application they fill out, and do you have a list of the required documentation
Good
that's
point.
expected from them? And could you forward that to us? Because it's possible that that information is also going to overlap, and it would be another way to meld the two.
So we actually do when it's a hardship exemption, we do a very extensive research. we, and when I say we, I mean, the clerk in the office, somebody that's actually there full time. They go out and they get bank records. They show all the assets a person has. We generally get a packet of like, I want to say 20, 30 pages that we look at when we are doing a hardship exemption.
Do you have a list of the documents you require
not-
them to provide? Because
I
what I'm getting at is we've talked about a little bit last week. Again, it's only our first session, so we're just getting to know the process and even know each other. And if we know specifically the document, because we've talked about what documents do we want to ask for besides copies of social security checks or bank records or,
They have
you know,
tax forms
tax
on
forms.
all of the other towns, federal and state income tax forms and any other additional information that you would like the committee to consider.
So-
That's from
So
Harvard.
what I'm saying is we, the Board of Assessors, get all of this information. It's already there. I would suggest a flow that would work and make sense. There might be some privacy issues we'll have to talk about, but putting privacy issues aside, we get all of that information that you're looking for in the Board of Assessors when we look at it. I would
Right,
suggest
that
that
is
that if we approve it, then it's done. That's the end.
I guess what we're asking for though is can you simply
Well,
at least
well-
send us a list of what you asked for? Do you
Oh, I'm
have
sure. Yeah, I don't have it immediately, but yeah, I could get it for sure.
Perfect.
Right, that would be a big help to us so that we're not overlapping and we can matriculate it
But
in.
what I'm trying to say, if I can finish, is that if we deny this person for whatever reason, I could then take all of the information that has already been presented to us as the Board of Assessors and send it to this committee. So it's like, why should the person have to go through all the work twice? I
Right,
could
so,
see this fund as being sort of a backstop for the exemptions at the Board of Assessors. Do you see what I'm saying?
yeah, so it could make sense if somebody has sought an exemption, if we were to include that prominently in the application, have you sought an exemption from the Board of Assessors? We could even develop another form, just to address the privacy angle, where maybe we could get a
Right.
written release to request that
Confidentiality
information.
agreement.
Right, a written
Exactly,
yeah.
request for, a written release from that person to
Yes.
request the information. Because as I understand it, Bill, the documents that people provide during the course of those types of meetings, I believe that is exempt from the public records law, is that correct?
Yes, absolutely, correct.
So.
And we do that all in executive session.
Yeah, we get some kind of certification and authorization from that person that we have the right on their behalf to request that confidential information from the
From the
assessors
Absolutely.
for the purposes of determining eligibility.
And
So-
Bill, do you mind me asking, so that was, I know we were at that point specifically talking about hardships. Is that also what the type of information you would look for just a regular,
For a senior tax exemption, yes.
senior tax and disabled, it's all the same list of documentations?
I'm not sure about disabled, to be honest with you. We haven't had stuff come across our desk. Jonathan, you might know more than I do. Is it
There's-
automatic or is there income?
There's no separate disabled tax relief right now. There's the blindness exemption, of course.
Right.
That has nothing to do with income whatsoever. That's just a certificate of blindness in the Mass Commission for the Blind.
Okay,
So that's not income based whatsoever.
okay,
So I qualify for that, for example, frankly.
Right.
But
And
that's,
same as veterans, correct?
I'm sorry, same as,
Veterans get the same thing. It's automatic, right?
correct. You provide, I think they provide a copy of their DD 214.
So we
Sure.
do not, so the answer to your question, Laura, is that we do not get that information for anybody but hardship or senior.
okay.
All right,
It
so,
would be nice to, if whatever our assessors ask for, we do too, so that it's not like wise, I don't know, I feel like it would just be more uniform.
I agree,
Agreed.
and, no, the exemptions granted by the assessors are generally larger dollar amounts than we're talking about
Right,
here.
exactly.
So really by the same logic, if it's good enough for them, it ought to be good enough
Right,
for us.
instead of us asking
Yes.
for more, and they're like, listen,
Right.
you're trying to give me $100, they can give me 1,000, why are you
Right,
asking me
right.
for
Right.
this long of history of my bank statements or something, you know?
The
Yeah.
one deviation from the assessors on the elderly component is where that was 70, potentially 65.
Right.
To your point, Laura, that you made about lowering it to 60, where I view the two of you, by virtue of your jobs, are gonna be kind of like I see you as like the first and foremost ambassadors of the program in a lot of ways. and where a lot of the residents you're gonna be interfacing with start at 60.
Yeah.
I
Right.
think that creates a very strong argument for us considering an age around of 60.
Yep,
That also is actually the Westboro age, they set theirs
Right.
at 60 as well.
okay,
They define disabled as a person of any age who's not able to work. The applicant could be receiving SSI, welfare, or retirement income, or may have suffered a loss of income due to illness or accident. Determination of disability eligibility is at the sole discretion of the committee. We may want to, take advantage of the fact that we have the ADA coordinator here, who is gonna be a lot more knowledgeable about what sort of documentation would be appropriate to request, whether it's a physician's note or something, we don't have to make a decision on that now, but if we could develop, some kind of criteria for what somebody could submit that would substantiate their proof of disability in a way that's proper.
And because of HIPAA,
yep,
we have the right to ask, for example, do you receive social security disability income, things like that, and ask for proof of that, or a copy of the most recent award letter, things like that, or ask them to get an award letter less than 30 days. However, when we get into their specific medical reasoning for it, really what we would probably want to do is there are several, and I'll bring these for next time, I will keep it on my radar, several standard forms that we can decide which one we would like to have their physician fill out, which will indicate the disability that they have without, because of HIPAA, violating their right to privacy.
Right,
So
Makes
we would
sense.
provide them with that form that we feel is gonna give us the information we need to.
and those standard forms exist.
There's about 8 standard forms that are really good. And they all use for a little bit of different thing, but generally they're used to look at what the sources of income are or not, or in the case of medical purposes, I think there are 8 that different doctors' offices use generally. And it will
Okay.
basically say, to whom it may concern, this is to certify that John Doe has such and such a disability, has had this disability for a period of time, this is what his limitations are, her limitations are. Do we foresee him able to work in the near future? No. Will he be able to work in the next 12 months? No, yes, like that.
Gotcha.
It's kind of a
Okay.
short checklist, and that's
Yeah,
what,
I
that's
think
what
that
we're
would be
looking for.
great. Then we have that form kind of in our packet or application, so if somebody needed that, it's all uniform there too.
Exactly.
yeah,
Absolutely. So just to go back to those 5 points, and these aren't necessarily the only 5 points.
No, but I had very similar, so,
But just as a jumping off point, where we said age, again, we don't have to make a decision now, but I think 60 is a very good idea. I think that the argument you made was strong, and I'm frankly convinced. I think 60 is a good age. Income, again, we don't have to make any decisions tonight, but where Jonathan mentioned that based on his census research, that it appears that as many as, was it 35% of
Yeah,
our
I
seniors?
saw one put up that said 35%. Did you have some figures you said you?
yeah, this one, that I found, it was the 2024 poverty guidelines, right now, so it was just general for the states, for the United States. So this one for a person, one person, the poverty guideline was $15,060. For a household of 2 people, it's $20,440.
can you repeat the 2 people, I'm sorry?
You got it, 2 people is
Thank you.
$20,440.
And this was for
This is
the
the
country or state?
Country.
Country, and this is the base level.
Base,
This
yep,
is the low base level.
absolutely.
Right.
So the question we would have from there is, do we want to cap it at, let's say, 125% of base or 150 of base?
I could see 150 being sensible, just considering, I'm just thinking about,
Yeah,
elderly couple, let's say, 2 people in the
Right,
household.
yeah.
yeah,
The poverty level is 20,000 approximately, so that 150 would still put you
Yeah.
at 30,000, which that's an awful tight.
it is.
I
And
know.
for- and
Yes, I know.
Right
the
now.
breakdown I have is for our area and our region,
Oh,
so
perfect.
that's what I'll bring in.
Okay,
Yeah, the
We're forward to
census,
everybody in the meantime, too.
before I looked at any numbers, I was just thinking, like, I came from the mortgage industry, and there were some that were, you would get subsidized mortgages if you were within 80% of the average county income, was how some of the programs were.
Okay.
When I looked at the average per capita income for the county, it was $42,006. And since, as Jonathan mentioned, where so many of our seniors are at the poverty level, and especially considering the amount of dollars that we have, I feel that 40-odd thousand is just too high.
Yeah,
And even at the 80%, you're still looking at about $33,000.
Right.
and that's for
Right.
one person?
Yeah, that's for
Wow.
one person, so my thinking is that that's too
Yeah,
high.
that's very
and
high.
Tethering it to the poverty level based on household size
Yeah.
might make the most sense.
yeah.
Do you have any input there, Bill?
No, I do not.
Okay. So income, again, not to make any decisions, but I think preliminarily, we ought to be examining the poverty level as our
Yeah.
basis for determining income
I do
somewhere.
think your data that you found for this area will be very helpful.
Yeah, that would be
Okay.
awesome.
Yeah, no, I think that-
This was just.
that really
general
guides the
state.
I will forward that to
Yeah.
everyone in the next day or so.
Yeah, so I think anywhere between, 120 to 150% of
Yeah.
the poverty level, I think would make sense.
All right.
One I thought was
So
interesting.
one thing I would like to add, though, or just to be
Please.
clear, I think the process should be always the same. If you're talking about doing a 60-year-old level, for example, they still should make the same application process, even though we know they're going to be denied from the Board of Assessors because they're not old enough, correct? But if you go through the entire same process, then you get the same people doing the same things, you'll get the same paperwork, et cetera, et cetera. So it's one flow. To have two different flows is going to be, it usually causes problems. So I suggest keeping it the same.
Bill, let me ask you, if somebody were to come in and apply for hardship, and let's forget about the blindness exemption for a minute, or perhaps another type of exemption, veterans, because that's different for the veterans exemption. If somebody came in and applied for hardship, what's the criteria that you're using? Do you have a financial threshold right now based on household size or age or anything like that? Because what if it turns out their property taxes, if the property tax is $9,000 and they've got $53,000, but they just can't do it, that's out of our range. So that's why I'm trying to get a sense.
So our hardship exemption goes like this, they'll collect all of the financial information about the person and it goes to our executive session and we review what are their assets, what are the liabilities, what's their income, what's their expenses. And if we see a situation where the person is, pretty much destitute, it's a yes or a no. So that's why we picked $1,000. So if the person is in really bad shape and they're just barely making ends meet, we will grant it.
And
But
actually,
there's no
But there's no-
number or
there-
percentage.
There's no specific
So the
number.
difference is
Okay.
They could be destitute with, a property tax bill of $9,000 and income of $53,000. But because of everything they have, expenses, potentially high medical expenses, et cetera,
Yeah.
they could still be considered destitute.
Exactly. Yep.
Okay.
absolutely, and actually, to go back to the Westboro.
If I can actually point out, there was, I don't think I'm giving any personally identifying information here, but there was one person that had put forth an application and she had a multifamily house that she lived in. But her daughter lived in the house, but yet she didn't show any rent. So we were like, no, we're not going to give you this because, you're trying to pull a fast one over on us by, saying that your daughter isn't paying you any rent, or if you're providing with a free house, that's your problem. You need to fix that. So we do examine the entire situation. It's not just a flat, numbers game or something like that. We look at the entire situation and try to make a good decision.
And the Westboro review process actually ends it with the final clause that the committee shall have the discretion to waive the aforementioned criteria due to unforeseen circumstances. So if you were in a situation where someone had an income that was slightly above the limit, however, they happen to be, say the generational farmer still owns a lot of land, taxes are assessed high, they're not, their house broke, right? And they have $12,000 property taxes. Even though they're outside of the guidelines, if we could reserve in our criteria the ability to waive certain requirements
Some type of
based on the whole
sentence.
kind of qualitative picture.
Yep.
So it would just be how we
How we
verbalize
word
the
it,
wording,
yeah.
that verbiage, okay.
Right, so we could reserve the right to do that. It doesn't have to be, as necessarily as formulaic as a coloring book.
Yeah.
We can reserve the right to, as long as we're not being discriminatory, obviously, but we can
Right.
reserve the right if, in what we believe to be exceptional circumstances.
Okay.
We could reserve the right to deviate from the guidelines, much like
Okay.
the assessors do with the hardship, if there's a good demonstrable reason
Right.
why somebody's in a certain situation. One thing that I thought was just the next thing on my list that I thought was interesting, and I'd really like to open it up to thoughts, was length of residency. Westboro requires that you have resided in Westboro for at least 5 years since the application deadline.
Yes,
Okay.
and I do see 5 years also in Seekonk, who is a close neighboring town. They must have owned and occupied real estate in Seekonk at his or her primary, I don't know how to say that word, that's embarrassing.
Domicile.
Thank you. For at least 5 years prior to the application deadline. And then similar on Harvard, they actually put in the date. So applicants have lived in Harvard and held title to the taxed property since, and they give a date, a full calendar year before the 8 grant submission deadline. So if we wanted to do something like that, there's a few different examples on how it's written out. If we want to give a hard date of this date or prior, or just a 5 year before the deadline. Or maybe no length of residency, or maybe a longer length, however we decide, but I kind of like the idea. But part of me at the same time knows finances are just really hard right now on everybody, whether you've lived here for 1 year. I mean, I'm a true Daytonian, born and raised, so of course I want to help my fellow forever Daytonians too, but I see it every day here. There's people coming through that are just having a really hard financial time in every avenue, so I could be swayed one way or another, to be honest. I see it from both sides.
I support the idea of a cutoff, such as you just said, like 5 years, you have to be there 5 years. I don't support the idea of like somebody that's been here for 20 years is more
Oh,
worthy
God, no.
than somebody that's been here for 10 years. But I do think the
That's not
cutoff
what I
is.
was suggesting if it came off that way.
No, I think Paul might have suggested that early at the very, very beginning. So I would not support that, but I do strongly support a minimum, because we don't want it to be a situation where, oh, well, Dayton gives away free money, so let's just move there.
Right, I don't think we're not talking about the amount of money that would attract tax rebate tourism, but
Right.
as a concept, I agree with you. I do agree that, I think, please, I apologize, go ahead.
That's okay. So my thought would be, and my comment is going to sound like reverse engineering, I suppose, because I'm thinking whether it's a parent, for example, living in the house with adult children, or adult children living in the house with a parent, and then whoever owns the house passes away, and they leave the house to the other person in the home, not the spouse, although it could be a spouse, but I'm saying if the adult leaves it to the child or vice versa, and the house is left to that individual through a trust or whatever form, but that person can't afford the property tax and they're the one on that fixed low income, 5 years is not going to do it. So I could see having a 2-year look back because of the potential trust issue. But I also think there needs to be a caveat, and I don't know if you do this through the assessor's office or not. I also think we would want to have a caveat that in order for this approval to go forth, it's with the understanding that the home will not be sold within 1 year of the approval of the assistance. And the reason I'm saying that is because I also don't think it's our responsibility, regardless of how low your income is, to give you the ability to make yourself whole so you can then sell the house. Sorry, that was.
No, I like the concept. What I'd be worried about would be an enforcement mechanism.
True.
Because if somebody does have a change of life circumstances, maybe at the very least, similar to getting a mortgage, right?
Yeah.
Is you could, so when you are buying your house, you are signing in your mortgage, one of the things that you are signing is that you intend to occupy that house as your
For
primary
X number of
residence.
years, correct.
Life can happen.
Right.
People, you know, I moved into a 2-bedroom house and had twins 10 months later. You know?
Right, life
So-
happens, you're right.
And so things can happen that change people's.
So forget about the part about
Absolutely.
the sale, but I still think the
Yeah.
part about the trust.
Yes.
And leaving it.
Yes.
Defines why we need to look at a lower year threshold.
Agreed.
So I do have 2 interesting points to that. That the first is that the other towns that we've looked at, namely Westboro and Harvard in particular, they have 2 provisions. Is that one does allow for a life estate. So either it must be in your name or in a life estate. If it is in a trust, then you must be both the trustee and 50% beneficiary. I don't know if I'm necessarily married to the idea that they must be the trustee, because especially if somebody is living with disability, they may very well have someone else
Absolutely.
who's serving as the trustee to administer it. And
Yeah.
Or even if they're older, I will say point blank, I'm 69 years old, my wife is 67. In the trust that we have, it's the first contingency for most things that we have, but the first beneficiary of it and the trustee is one of our daughters. It's not Kim or I. So theoretically, our assumption is as the parents, they're gonna give us full access to whatever we want with it, whoever's alive at that point.
Sure.
But theoretically, just in case, if something happened to me today and Kim developed Alzheimer's tomorrow, our daughter is the trustee, 100%.
Right.
And I think a lot of older people do that.
I agree. I do think that requiring them to be at least 50% beneficiary would be fair by the same logic that we're not allowing someone who is an elderly renter renting a house.
Yeah.
Or is just living with a family member, is just cohabitating with a family member. I do think that requiring them to be the trustee, I think is unnecessary. I think it's a little bit heavy-handed. But I could make a case for them having to be at least 50% beneficiary.
That I could agree with, yeah.
But yes, for all the reasons that you mentioned, I think that having them also be trustee might be a little more than is necessary.
Yeah.
But I do like the idea of regarding both houses in trust where the beneficiary is the applicant,
Yeah.
or a life estate which is occupied by the applicant.
Yeah.
I think either of those would be as fair as if they were in the person's name.
Okay.
Bill, do you have any thoughts on that?
I'd like to point out that as far as assessing goes, there's a great amount of rules around this area. And I think what you've discussed is sort of the basic rules that exist. Is that you have to either own the property or you have to have a life estate. It has to name you as the beneficiary, et cetera. We've actually denied people because their houses were in a trust that didn't have their name on it.
Which does make sense, because I mean, there are realty trusts that are leasing property, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So requiring them to be a beneficiary at least does show that they have a legitimate ownership stake in the property.
Right.
True.
Or at least, actually, if we're talking about trust, I guess the term would be beneficial interest. They have a legitimate beneficial interest in the trust.
I think that we have, hearing what you're saying and what you have to do, Bill, for the purposes of assessors, 75% of what you have to do, if not a little bit more, conforms to what we have to do, but I think we have a little bit more leeway in terms of what we could look at, whether it be
Exactly.
age, whether it be who the beneficiaries are, because partly what we're gonna get may come to us directly, but part of it is still gonna come through you or your office and recommendations. But I think also considering what we're looking at for dollar values and so forth in terms of income potentially, or even in terms of what we can allocate,
Right.
we're in a whole different.
Yeah,
No,
I completely agree. That's why I asked my initial question.
Yeah,
And I'm looking at it, because I am a software engineer and I'm looking at it from how I would design software for this. And the first step would be to go to the Board of Assessors, you meet all the criteria, and then you go to the Elderly and Disabled Committee, who have looser criteria. So that is how you fall into that crack. This is my original question is, are we in addition to what the Board of Assessors, or are we trying to give it to people that the Board of Assessors deny? And I believe that's the answer is so go to the Board of Assessors first, get denied, and then go to us, go to this committee where the rules are more lax.
And on our form, if we were going to say, as the first or second question, include, have you applied for an
Right.
exemption?
Yes.
We could even include prominent language that says being denied an exemption does not disqualify you for
Right.
consideration with this
Right,
committee.
yeah.
That way, as long as it's in your big bold letters, so
Yep.
that folks don't say.
No, I think it's the opposite. It's the opposite. You have to get denied in order to qualify for.
Right, exactly. So that might just be a way of letting people know that, especially if they don't.
well, that's assuming they've come to you.
So this is what I said earlier, is that I believe all people should go to the Board of Assessors first.
Yep, I think that makes plenty of sense. I also think a 2-year residency requirement is sensible. I think 5 years might be a little bit further, yeah.
Yeah, I think.
And,
2 years for the, length of residency?
Yes, yeah, have you resided in
Yeah.
Dayton or have you resided at this address for at least 2 years, something like that.
2 years from the back date of application.
Yes,
date of application,
exactly.
Something like that.
I think that would be good. We also could, again, we could require 50% beneficial interest in a trust, but, we could also, as we talked about earlier, reserve the right to bend the criteria a little bit if a situation warrants it. You may very well run into a situation where you've got 3 siblings who each have 33% beneficial interest, but
Yeah.
one is out of state and it is a genuine bona fide situation where the person would otherwise qualify and does have a demonstrable need. So I think requiring 50%, but reserving the caveat that we can go outside the criteria based on the overall picture.
Yeah.
I think makes sense.
There is a line in Harvard's, under the eligibility under their guidelines. It's the last bullet point in Part A. Extraordinary circumstances and unusual expense is an example they give, but we could use any example. Will be considered in the committee's deliberation decision process. This will provide the committee with flexibility to address unforeseen situations. So I think having something written like that, if we want to even tailor it specifically to the trust side of this, we could, or we could try to find that sentence or something blanketed like that does allow us a little bit more wiggle room to look through some of these applications if there is that strange circumstance where, it's not quite uniform to the application or the guideline.
Absolutely. And then to move on to the next bullet point was I had additional preference is what I called it. If we had any kind of local initiative, exactly,
Yes.
any local thing that we wanted to just add as a qualitative consideration, like veterans, because as we discussed last time, there may be a veteran who is elderly and is not disabled yet does have veteran status. There may be someone who is a disabled veteran yet does not have disabled veteran status, there's no
Right.
service-connected disability, which would allow us to still consider it. We wouldn't be bound to go by it, if we have greater need from somebody who is,
Sure.
is clear,
Right.
but if we do have a case where we've got, very similar applicants,
Yeah.
it might be an additional consideration.
Seekonk
sure.
has a line in theirs on page 2 they have their headings, it's listed under other. Preference will be given to applicants who demonstrate the greatest need and do not qualify for any other existing exemption or deferral program administered by Seaconk's assessing department, which is what we just kind of discussed. And I wrote a note to write, and veterans, preference is given to veteran applicants, as well as, maybe we can write as well as the other side of this, people who don't qualify, that maybe they already got an exemption and they still need a little bit of help, but the people who didn't get anything would be who we want to review
We could just
first.
put their veterans.
And then obviously add veterans in there too. Well,
Right,
say
it'll be
obviously, we
considered
all
as
agree
part of the
with that.
decision-making process.
Yeah, I really liked that line that they had, because that's kind of another
I
way
agree.
to filter out where we start with applications anyway.
And degree of verification, I think that Bill kind of answered a lot of that for us, that if we're going to be having folks apply with the Board of Assessors, they'll be providing some pretty extensive documentation that we know by virtue of the fact that that process is kind of on the train tracks, is defined by statute.
Yeah.
We'll know that everything that is being requested is pretty well enshrined in law and is, conforms to the modern standards and best practices for, determining need.
Bill, does the Board of Assessors Office currently have a letter of release they can sign in order for you to provide something to another committee or town functional organization? Or do
No.
we need to create our own so that they?
No, no such thing has ever happened as far as I know.
Okay, so we would need to have one
Created.
for them to sign through you, through the Board of
I
Assessors.
think what we said earlier is like some sort of waiver or something like that.
Yeah, there are standard waivers we can put together.
Have the applicant themselves sign, giving
Yes.
permission, and then, I don't know if we would need someone from our board to sign as well. Well, actually, Bill would be kind of both with assessors and with this.
We probably want it signed by the chair of each,
Yeah. I
and
think
then,
that would
and
be
then the
fair.
applicant.
So that way all three involved parties are in agreement.
That makes sense. The other things that I was thinking about were, the means of processing. the
You know, I'm sorry, I just thought of something as you were saying that. So this, when we do this stuff for the Board of Assessors, we do everything in executive session. I do not think it will be wise for this committee to be reviewing this personal information in a public forum.
No, we
Oh,
wouldn't,
no,
we
this,
can't,
this
no,
would be
Oh,
executive
no,
session.
no, we're already ahead of you on that one. We know that any applicants we review have to be in executive session, and that none of us can discuss any of the information similar to you outside of that executive session.
Right.
Good, thank you.
Now, you did raise a good point though, Bill, because if they're reviewing all of that information in executive session and they get all that documentation, are we allowed to, even though we have all three parties sign it, is that going to, I guess, not open meeting law because it's executive session, but are there laws against what can be, then they're sharing something from their executive session? Or is the documentation kind of different? Would that get a little dicey with them reviewing those in executive session than us reviewing?
I have seen other, not our Board of Assessors, but I've seen other Board of Assessors where they have, the person making the application has the right to request that it be reviewed in open session. So ultimately, it's the person's private information, and they can choose to do with it as they please. So I just think we simply need a waiver to say that we can take the information provided to the Board of Assessors executive session, will be provided to the Elderly and Disabled Committee in executive session as well.
And all those signatures, we should be good then.
Yeah, I think so.
Me, in a
We
worst
can-
case
we can
scenario.
run it through our town council.
Yeah, I was gonna say, in a
Sure.
worst case scenario, it could involve just a one-time startup legal opinion, just to make sure. that
Yeah,
we're
I think
covering
that would be
outside
a
the
great
lines.
idea. So town council.
We can, we can.
So-
we
And they can help us
yeah.
draft it. They've helped the COA draft a lot of different things that we've needed through volunteers and programs that we run that are confidential too. So that would be a very wise idea.
And then, the last points that I had on my list here were just the means of processing awards, and then the minimum, maximum, what I just called the hard maximum. So I would say that we would want to process these as simply a credit directly to the tax bill.
Yep.
That would be beneficial for a number of reasons.
Excuse me.
One of which would be that if somebody were to make an overpayment or something, we wouldn't want to be refunding somebody cash
Right.
for the
Yeah.
specific amount of that award.
Yeah.
Also, we want to make sure, these folks inherently need the money, right? We don't want to make them, also from the time that we make a decision, we notify, we submit it on a schedule of bills payable, it goes
Right,
to the
that
town accountant's office, it goes to the warrant cycle, then it goes in the US Postal Service. And
We
so
know how long you guys take over there.
that's it.
Hey, Paul, just interesting question. I'm not sure this has ever happened, but what does happen if somebody overpays their taxes? What do you do?
They receive a refund for the amount of the overpayment at the end of the fiscal year.
So do you see anything wrong with this committee simply paying the taxes?
No, not at all. Nope, that's actually how several of these towns do it, is they just process it as a credit. So what would happen would be, they would submit, I believe they would just do it as a schedule of bills payable to the accounting office, and then rather than me mail a check, no check would be generated. It would be generated as a non-check transaction, and then I would offset that on the reconciliation side by processing a corresponding payment to their tax account, and then just including that in the documentation, so that the total amount of money dispersed, there's no payable, so to speak, to
So in
correspond.
essence, if we were to say that the minimum, just gonna say this out loud for a second, the minimum request is $100, the maximum request is $300, and the person requests $300, we approve it, but at that point, we go to make the transfer, and it would stipulate in advance not to exceed the outstanding balance up to net zero. So if the outstanding balance were $270 and we've approved $300, we're only gonna transfer $270. We're not gonna transfer $300.
That's exactly what I call that hard max, is when I
Yes,
did my minimum,
exactly.
maximum, hard maximum.
And
The
that's
hard
what-
maximum would be
And that's what
the
we would be
liability.
doing.
I did see that written in every one of the guidelines as well, that it would not exceed what, the wording on there is way better than what I'm gonna say. Sorry, my brain is shut off.
Do you have any concerns or care about somebody that's behind?
That's a really good question, and to be honest, I don't know how everybody else feels, but I wrestle with it. I don't feel, I feel kind of ambivalent on it, because
Let me pose a hypothetical to you. So let's say you've got somebody that actually is having a hard time and hasn't paid their taxes in, I don't know, whatever your time frame is, say, 2 years or 3 years or something. And you are on the cusp of going to tax title on it. And they go through and now suddenly, boom, this committee pays $300. Does that reset the whole clock for you and such?
Well, let me ask you the question first. Have you approved them for hardship up to that point?
We might, but that simply reduces their taxes.
Right, but all we can do is reduce it further.
Yes, no, I'm trying to talk
think-
about Paul's, and as Paul's job as a collector. There comes a point at which he has to start taking legal action.
so
And
what I would
What I'm
say-
saying is that if we make a payment on somebody else's behalf, does that jam up the legal process?
Oh, no, nope. So what would happen, so under the law, I can initiate a tax taking within 14 days of the due date of a demand. And so what happens is the unpaid taxes at the end of the fiscal year go to demand. After they go to demand, if they're still not paid, sometimes we give them an additional one. It's called going to warrant, which basically just means, first you get the white bill. If you don't pay the white bill, you get a pink bill. If you don't pay the pink bill, you get a blue bill. And so the blue bill is the optional one. We're not required by law. We're required by law to do the pink ones. So what I could see would be that if somebody is not current, I would like to see a requirement where the property is not in tax title. I think that would make sense. So if somebody is behind, say they've made partial payments or they're a couple of quarters behind, that might be because of an illness, injury, disability, something that has come on in that time period. Whereas if it's somebody who has just got years of non-payment, to me, that's not what people are donating for. Because if somebody is at the point where they haven't paid taxes in 6 years, I don't think that this $300 is gonna.
It's not
Do any of
be
you,
with
do
it.
these other applications address that for current year only or anything like that?
Oh, actually, I did not read that.
I don't know.
Oh,
Or for anything about arrearage and how far
the
back?
award shall not exceed the taxpayer real estate. The award shall not exceed the taxpayer's real estate tax liability as of, and it gives a date. So it does.
So, but we could put the word current year liability.
Yeah.
Right,
Yeah,
exactly,
yeah.
for fiscal year such and
Right,
such.
for fiscal year such and such. And we would have to put a caveat
Right,
Yeah.
that excluding any prior arrearages, which will, nullify the application.
Well, I think what Paul said is best, is tax title.
Because that's very close to that timeline.
Because you're right at the edge. So my big concern is that legally, I have seen in the past, in dealing with collections and debt collectors, that there's this concept of, you're right at the edge of legal action, and then you make a $10 payment, and then all of a sudden it resets the clock, and and the debt collector now has to wait 6 months or another year before they can even try to coming after you again. And that's the only situation I wanted to make sure we avoided.
Yes, so that does not, that doesn't come into play with property taxes. You're required, once you go to demand, you're required to pay off, so the collector can, transfer them over to the treasurer's tax title, whether you've paid the balance down or not. Generally speaking, if somebody's making regular payments and is gonna pay it off reasonably fast, I don't, because I'm required to advertise tax takings in the newspaper, and the town doesn't pay for that. We just take the cost for the newspaper and then we break it up by the amount of parcels. So just as an example, say you have 10 properties and the ad costs you $1,000. I'll break that up and add $100 to the tax title balance of each person. So if somebody is making a good faith effort and we work out a timeline and they're gonna pay it off within 4 or 6 or 9 months, I'm gonna save them those additional fees
Yep.
and leave them out of the taking and then just work out a deal with them.
Okay.
But I would say that, so that doesn't reset the timer, so it's a great question. But also, I think that allowing them to be delinquent in the current year, or sometimes it can even be the quarter of the previous year, depending on how the posting timelines go. But that would be, at the very least, they're not that behind, and they're behind enough that, especially if we have a, say, a 2-year residency requirement,
Yep.
they have been, even if they were delinquent, they've still been current for at least half or more of the time that we're
Right.
looking at.
Okay.
So I think that making it so that it's no longer, as long as it's not in tax title, I think would make sense.
And then the last part of that then would be, how often are we going to allow it? No more than once every 3 years? 4
Oh, for
years?
how
5
often,
years?
What, the
how often can
applications?
will we grant the awards to the same
Yes.
people?
You know, some people, oh, I did that next year, I'm gonna do this again next year.
I could see.
I'm not saying that they don't
If
need
they
it.
were to qualify, I don't think that would be a problem. There was a note on here that because you did this application, this is a annual application, or I forget how it's phrased, oh, no, even if you received an award last year, you must reapply each year to be considered. This is from Seekonks. That's just an example on there, and I did read it on either Harvard or Westboro's too. I don't think that they would immediately be denied because they could still be in a similar situation
And based
where
on the
they're
number
on
of
fixed income.
Based on the applicants we get, we may have a slower year where it would
Yeah.
make sense, but
The only, I'm the devil in the room, I'm sorry.
no.
The only problem I have with that is we have a small fund to work with. And we may get no applicants 1 year, we could get 6 the next year, 2 the next year, and then none again. Or we could get 6 and then 12, 2 and none. And my concern is that if an applicant gets to the point or feels that, well, I did it last year, I'll do it next year, and I did it last year and next year, now I'll do it the year after that. Yes, we could deny the application.
Right.
But having said that, there may be other applicants that we want to be able to help, and then we have to deny that one that we've denied 2 years in a row.
I think
Right.
it would be
I think
based
it
on
makes-
their documents that they send us too.
I mean, we have to have the documents, and I don't disagree, they have to meet that criteria. I just wonder if it makes sense, if nothing else, to put for no more than 2 consecutive years, to be separated by 2 consecutive years, something like that.
That makes sense, I would say, or at the very least, we could,
So that way it kind of it compromises with what you're thinking in terms
Yeah.
of them meeting it the next year too.
I feel like
Right,
that,
because some people are going to, I know,
Yeah.
I know what you're saying, Jonathan, you don't want people to just kind of like take advantage of it and keep coming back
right,
and
and
keep coming
crowd
back.
out
Yeah.
other
You know,
people.
So
of
if we-
course, but there are people that really could
do.
use it
And
after a whole year again.
Absolutely, if something happened, for example, and they did it for the fourth quarter, okay, or the second half of the year, and then something happened and they're still stuck for that first quarter or first part of the next year, there's an example of what you're saying in terms of helping them 2 years in a row.
Yeah.
But I think then at least to have something that,
Put
for
a
2
cap on it.
consecutive years.
May I suggest that we don't have to codify it? There's no reason, we don't have to like put it in writing that, any sort of requirements as to how many years you can do in a row or anything like that. But what we could simply do is, and I'm not sure, when the time comes, like Jonathan said, how many applicants are we going to have? How much money are we going to have, et cetera. But if we get to a point where we've got so many people and we have to deny somebody because we don't have enough money, then those people that got something last year, maybe they go to the end of the list. Or if
Yeah,
we have plenty of money, why not give it to them?
Yeah, we could make it something like where we may reserve the right to consider additional criteria or
Yeah.
to color outside the lines in terms of extraordinary circumstances.
Yeah.
We could similarly reserve the right to grant additional consideration to applicants who did not receive an award in the previous fiscal year. That might be a good way to thread the needle, where if we do have
Exactly, yes.
twice in a row, but does
Absolutely.
have a demonstrable need,
Yep.
we wouldn't be handcuffed.
Right,
But at the same time, like Jonathan said, to that point, that would also preserve the fund to make sure that it doesn't necessarily just become the frequent flyers
Yep,
club. To
absolutely.
the point where it crowds out other people who do have needs.
The only reason I say we should put the language in there is because I don't want a resident to say to us, well, it was 2 years and, now you have some discretion, but you denied me the third year, but I know you have money there. And then they start to think that they're being, and I hate to use the word, either discriminated against or not liked or whatever it is. So now they say, I'm going after the town for what we're trying to do on a positive basis for maybe a maximum of $300, and somebody takes it the wrong way. So to me, it's just a way to avoid it, I guess, by putting the language in there. Look, everywhere here, we're going to have several places where it says, we have discretion to make it
Right.
different at different times, and at the very bottom of the application, I'm sure going to say something to the effect of all applications for et cetera, will be considered at the discretion of.
right.
So,
And also, I mean, this is just hypothetical, of course, but say right now we have $3,000, right? And we get so many applicants, I'm not good at math, but so many applicants that say our minimum is $100 and we want to at least try to give anyone who qualifies enough money, but we have more money, we have less money than applications. There are going to be situations where we, one, just don't have enough money to disperse it to everybody. That could be a possibility, depending on what we get for donations. We don't know what that's going to look like. Hopefully we do get more the more we advertise for it, but I think there's going to be situations where not everyone's going to be approved because we only have so much we can do.
Yeah.
And they might not meet the criteria anyway. But I don't know how we would really, I like the way you phrased it, Paul. I worry the opposite, that we write something in there and then they applied 1 year and they know they can't, and then we'd have to monitor, did you apply last year? Oh, you did, so we can't accept this person this year, we can accept them the next year.
Yeah.
So
that can get
it's,
messy.
it
one
might
other-
get messy in
one other-
assets too.
One other last way to do it before Paul says anything, I'm sorry if I cut either of you off, but one other last possibility is to put in, based on, what we currently have, and we have discretion to change this, but we could do this on an annual basis and put it in our application, is that the total award this year, total awards for residents will not exceed, for example, $1,500 or a maximum of 15 residents. And then next year, if we get 20 residents, we can say $1,500 or 1,500. And then if we only have 800 the next year, we can only say 800. So we can do that on an annual basis. What's the maximum awards we can fund?
They actually don't have any of that in any of this. It doesn't, I didn't see it
minimal
written
maps.
anywhere where it shows,
They may
This-
have larger, more well-established funds.
right.
We have such a small amount. That's the only reason I'm thinking,
I don't know if we necessarily have to make that in the guidelines or application, though. I think that's just gonna
we could
be
do that internally.
something that we
Internal,
know,
yeah.
all right.
No,
Right.
I guess I'm saying we should just do it for ourselves internally.
Right, I agree with that,
So that at
100%.
least-
I don't
Yeah.
know if it necessarily needs to go on application or
Yeah,
guideline, but
yeah.
I do agree. We
Right.
obviously need to budget like we do in
Yeah.
every department. We'll have to definitely make sure we're not.
Right,
Over-
eventually, we may want to consider tethering the contribution, the distributions that we grant to be equal to, right now, we don't have to worry about it because we have a built-up surplus, but maybe tether it to the prior fiscal year's contribution amount.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Because eventually, we will give all of this money away,
that's,
Right.
yeah, exactly.
And,
That's what I'm afraid of. And then,
yeah, absolutely.
right? And then we don't want to give away,
We can't predict
we don't want
what
to
we'll
do
get
these in
either.
March and then give away all of last year's and then half of this year's, and then the following year only have 9
and
months
that's,
or so.
and you know what, that is something, you're right. That is something we could do each year when we're doing our budget. And somebody makes a motion that we're not going to exceed.
Yeah,
And
make that
that's
part
an
of our
internal-
meetings.
Exactly. Yeah, you're right about that.
Because it's gonna fluctuate
Yep.
every
Every year.
year. Hopefully for a high number, but
Right, right.
who knows?
Yeah, and we could even include in there that preference will be given or additional consideration will be given to first-time applicants or
Yes.
applicants who did
Yes,
not
yep.
receive an award in the last year or
Absolutely.
something of that nature to kind of build in a little bit of a buffer
Yeah.
and
yeah.
not make it inaccessible to people, but at the same time, make sure that we're giving people extra opportunities who aren't, we're also not creating an expectation of receiving the award in perpetuity.
Yep.
So I'd like to address what Jonathan was saying. He brought up a very interesting point, but I don't think it's a solvable problem. We may very well, if we have anything, and I literally mean absolutely anything that we as a committee have discretion on, meaning that we get to sit down and judge and weigh, that will open us up to accusations of some sort of favoritism, some sort of, that we're penalizing somebody. God forbid if, there was a black applicant and a white applicant and the black applicant got denied. These sort of things are going to crop up, and there's a million different ways I think it could show up. I think that simply leaving it to discretion of whether you got it last year or this year, I think that's minor compared to all the other possible accusations that could be made.
No, absolutely. That does make sense, and we're gonna have to be very careful, because the appearance of discrimination can be as harmful to public perception as actual discrimination itself. So we will have to be very careful in, in how we judge these and make sure that we're examining things based on the merits of each individual application.
Right, and the guidelines that we create.
The problem is, I don't know, no pun intended for myself, that we can look at these blindly, because the bottom line is, if with the applications, there's a lot of documentation we're gonna be needing to look at for supporting the individual's request or the family's request. So there's really no way to look at this without looking at the address, without looking at the name, et cetera. Unless anybody has.
Of course, I was simply trying to point out, that I don't think this is a problem we can solve. I don't think, the only way it could be solved is if we literally just had, it was robotic, like there was just an algorithm and people fell through the algorithm. And even then people could say that the algorithm is somehow discriminatory. I don't think we can fix the problem. So what I'm trying to simply.
Well, I think in a way, Bill, though, when we look at a couple of different things, if we say, for example, we're going to give preference to a veteran or slash a veteran with a disability or a person with a disability or a person who has this and that, if we're looking at giving a preference, then we, in a way, have to create a little bit of an algorithm that we work with, one way or another. If it's a rubric that we look at 10 points and see, okay, this person is a veteran, this person is single, and this person has an income of $22,000, and that puts them at such and such a category. We may have to come up with a rubric that we look at to see whether they fall within that criteria, and then do they meet 5? Do they meet 6? Do they meet 7 of the 10? I don't know that we need to go that far.
Based on any preferences that we
Exactly.
state. I see what you're saying.
Because once we say a veteran has a preference, what about a senior who's here, who's not a veteran, but is in just as much need, and comes to you guys and say, I really need it? We're gonna try.
We'd have to kind of make like a,
So I think we have to have a little
chart of
bit, exactly, we have to
what
have.
would be priority versus
Yes,
not.
yeah, I think we have to have a little bit of a rubric that we work with.
And that'll be written at least into the guidelines,
Right.
of what we
Yeah.
would take preference or, to, and then us internally can maybe each have like almost not a cheat sheet, but, a way of sorting the
Right.
applications.
Yeah, we
that
have to
come
have a
in.
scoring sheet.
A
Right.
scoring
Score
sheet,
them,
yes,
yeah.
thank you.
Yep,
Right, I think.
What about,
Element to that would make sense. I don't think it necessarily has to be as binary as a scored number.
Yeah.
For
Right.
the same reason that the Board of Assessors doesn't do that. And, if we're talking about, perceptions of discrimination or anything like that, they're indemnified with the deliberations that they have to do, and they have the ability to consider extraordinary circumstances.
Right.
And if we tie ourselves to, this box is worth 5 points, this box is worth 10 points, we're gonna quickly lose our ability to respond to extraordinary circumstances, and we may inadvertently shut out people who are in need. So I
which is
think,
why I'm pro not having the things written down and like this is a policy that we can leave a lot of these open for us to discuss in executive session. I'd like to make one other point though, or something we didn't
and
talk
I
about.
apologize, I do actually have a hard stop at 5:30. It's 5:15 now, but I just wanted to
Yes.
Okay, well, so important is there going to be a time frame? Because at the assessor's office, there's a very clear, like every single month, there's a different deadline and things are done in certain time frame of the year. We talked about tethering the amount of money that we give out to the amount we collected last year. So is this something we're going to hand out like once a year? Boom, goes to everybody, or is it going to be a case by case basis? And if we do it on a case by case basis, how do we avoid spending all the money in the first month when the person in the 10th month needs it?
I agree. I would personally be amenable to us mirroring the assessor's timelines more or less exactly.
Yep.
Because especially if part of our mission is to be connecting people with the resources that are available to help them, referring them to the Board of Assessors to seek an exemption is gonna be a component of that. So I think operating on the same timeline just kind of makes plenty of sense.
Just FYI, the Board of Assessors timeline is brutal, absolutely brutal. I hate it.
Well, where with
It's not secret, come on in. You come in and sit
with
down.
a fair amount of
Come in
these,
earlier.
we're going to be, depending on how we set this up, if we're going to be operating on a release from the applicant in order to receive the documents, and we're gonna be directing people to seek an exemption.
Right.
To me, it only makes sense that we kind of hitch our wagon to the same
If
timeline.
we did our timeline
Yeah.
prior, they could get, say we approve them for something here, but their timeline isn't over yet, then they could go and get an exemption from
Right,
it too.
and then they could end up having no tax liability or having overpayment based on our credit, which we would then have to claw back and then
Yep.
roll over back to the fund.
Okay, so may I suggest that what we could do is develop our own timeline with the Board of Assessors that would be congruent with the Board of Assessors timeline, but something that works for us.
It's a great idea. Yep.
But it doesn't have to be, if you don't, the Board of Assessors has like a 1 month window for you to file an exemption. It's ridiculous.
Right, it is very tight, because it's the, last day of April, or first day of April, or last day of April, or something like that.
Well, I'm thinking about assessment challenges, when people are looking for abatements, the bills come out on December 31st and they have until February 1st to file for an abatement. It's crazy.
Right.
Actually, if I can tell a short anecdote, we have a person who we made a mistake. So they had 1 year, they filed an abatement, we granted it because we had done things wrong. The next year, they didn't think anything of it. And then all of a sudden they looked at their tax bill and was like, oh, that went back up because we never fixed it. We fixed their tax, but we didn't fix the underlying problem. So the next year they got billed again. So they came back to us. We were not allowed to abate them because they had passed January 31st. We were not allowed to give them an exemption. We appealed all the way to the state and they would not allow us to give the person the money back. It's
Wow.
crazy.
Wow.
It was one of the worst examples I've ever had, and I feel so bad. We did everything we could for these people, and the state tied our hands. Anyway, dumb story, sorry.
No. In terms of like minimum and maximum awards, I think Jonathan nailed it. I think anywhere between that like $100 minimum to $300 maximum. I think that's totally fair, especially given the amount of money that we currently have to work with. I think that I have no objections to that.
Yeah.
Again, these aren't really action items for today, but.
I was gonna actually ask if we think this would be beneficial or not, because, we definitely went a lot more in depth this meeting than the previous one. I'm wondering if, based off of this meeting and last, all the information and kind of ideas that we've looked at, I like that you sent us Westboro, it gives us another one to look at, and they had some really good ideas. Would it be a good idea for somebody, one of us, to do a little extra homework and create a rough draft of Dayton's guidelines and then an application for Dayton as well? Based off of everything we talked about, all the ideas we had, the things we like, bring it to another meeting, because obviously it's May, time's moving quick. I think you said in the last meeting, the letters you send is it mid-June or end of June?
Yes, the end of June. is when
End of
the- is
June.
when the
We
preliminary-
want to try and
We
get
should
something
get
in there,
something
yeah.
So I
done
think-
soon.
It's great to look at each piece, and I like pieces from every single one, and I have
Me
notes
too.
on all of them, and putting it all into one rough draft. Obviously, we can tweak it and then approve a final, because I'm sure there'll be some things that are missed, because there is a lot of information and it's very important. making a vote to have somebody create that rough draft for a guideline and application.
I can work on the guidelines.
Oh, come on, I was just gonna motion for Laura to do it. He who makes the
Giving you
suggestion.
all my
good
stuff
job.
so you can see all my little chicken scratch on here.
I think
Do we
I,
need a motion for that too, I guess is
I
the
mean, I
question,
thi-
or is
I-
it just something we can
I
do?
think,
and
I
bring to the
think I
next
can
meeting?
work on the guidelines.
Okay.
And because with everything that we've talked about, and if I have the guidelines from the other towns as well, it's really tweaking
Right,
more than anything, putting a few things, taking a few things out, changing some timelines.
yep,
So I think that I can work on the guidelines, but if somebody else wants to work on the application,
I don't mind doing that.
don't everybody jump, you want to do the
Yeah,
application?
absolutely.
I don't mind doing
Okay,
that.
Okay,
all right.
and,
We probably want to meet sooner than, do we want to wait a month?
I think
Yeah,
probably-
time,
we'll do sometime
Well, I
next
mean,
month, right? You
if
said
we,
before.
what I mean is if we want to get these bills out, to get these in the bills, if we wait until the second Thursday of next month,
I'm
that's
nervous
the-
we
Paul, you
won't
said you weren't
have,
even available next Thursday.
Yes, I
Next
am-
month on that
yes.
Thursday, so what about the first Thursday of the month?
the
because
first
we'll
Thursday,
have to review, probably make tweaks, and then do another meeting where we approve.
well, what we
Yes.
could do,
We'll probably need 2 meetings before you do your mailer, right?
what we could
At
do
least.
that may help us would be that the only thing that really needs to be determined for the mailer is when the application period is going to be.
Oh, okay,
Because we already have the insert, and basically what I can do is, with the approval of the Board of Selectmen, I can edit that insert to say applications are available at the Board of Assessors office, and the application window is between such and such date. And-
gotcha, so we just need dates right now. I guess depending on when those dates start too, that'll give us a timeline of when we need to finalize our guidelines
well,
and.
do we want the dates to be based on calendar year or fiscal year?
I would say, I think it would make sense, and we can discuss it more in depth at the next meeting, is I think it would make sense if we were to mirror in some way, so maybe this could be a good action item. Bill, when is the next Board of Assessors meeting?
I believe it's next Wednesday.
Next one's, would you be willing to add an item to discuss this at the assessors meeting and then just give? us
Already
some
planning on it.
feedback? Perfect. So if the Board of Assessors can give us some feedback on when would be the ideal time for them to receive the applications based on the exemption timeline, maybe we could make our application window run 30 or 60 days prior to that. So just as an
Okay.
example, if they needed,
Yeah.
if they needed to be, if everything needed to be received by them prior to, was it February 1st? Is that what you said, Bill? Prior to February 1st?
That's for abatement requests
Oh,
for, I
excuse me.
believe it's April 1st, I believe, for exemptions. But
Okay,
don't,
so we could make the, just as an example, no, not tied to this timeline, but we could make it say, application is gonna run February 1st through March 31st, just as an example, something like that. Like, we could include the, yep, please feel free to apply at the Board of Assessors, applications are available at the Board of Assessors.
Yeah,
Application window runs from February 1st until March 31st, or whenever the date is. We can discuss that, we can discuss that at the next meeting.
Now,
Okay.
will you also at the next meeting have the revised language that we were gonna use or talked about using for the notice going out in the assessor, in the bills?
That is the notice that was going out in the bills. So, in the bills, excuse me, in the tax bill is an insert, which right now just says that it's the senior and disabled voluntary tax contribution, please check off or write in your contribution amount. Really, for the tax bill mailing, just because we don't want to pay for,
Yep.
printing and paper stuffing for the application itself in there. So really, we would just be amending the insert that currently exists in order to include a line on how to apply, where applications are available, when the application
yeah,
window would
a
be.
little more detailed
And
to it.
then if we're going to begin that, let's just say that we're gonna do it sometime,
The only fear I have is that if we're sending these out, these bills go out when, the end of June, right? but we're saying that the application period is February 1st to, for example, March 31st.
They'll get it again in December.
Okay, all right, that's, I forgot. Okay,
Yep, so they'll get it-
Say, how many people are gonna remember?
Yeah, I was gonna say, the big one really is, we wanna get it updated for June, just to generate awareness and
Right.
hopefully spurn future contributions.
Get some more money.
The really important one is gonna be the actual billing, which is in December.
Okay,
But I think that we've got a lot of really good, jumping off point. I think that we covered a lot between, I think that, just to recap, the age, and again, these aren't motions, we can tweak these next month when we look at the, application. I think an age of 60 would be a great jumping off point. I agree. I believe that, to Jonathan's point, tying the income to the poverty guidelines, I think makes a lot more sense than the per capita county income, based on the amount of money we have and the need in the community. A length of residency, I like the concept. I think 5 years is too strict. I personally feel anywhere,
I think
2 years, I think
great.
is
2 years,
good.
we
I
think,
think
yeah.
that's kind of the Goldilocks one. Additional preference is, we could include a checkbox or something to that effect of, are you a veteran? The depth of the verification, maybe we can get a little more information from the Board of Assessors in the meantime on the specifics of what documents are requested.
Yep.
And then we can confer with the town administrator to get his opinion and see if a legal opinion is necessary in order to generate a waiver to allow them to turn over the documents to us for our review.
so what I might do then, I'm just gonna interrupt you
Yeah,
for a second,
please,
because I'm
please.
just gonna ask you if we should do this. For the poverty guidelines, if we're gonna use 150% of our county's poverty guideline, I'm gonna put in there that when I do this, family of one, I'll just put, for example, it might be $26,000. Family of two, $33,000, family of three, $38,000, family of four, $44,000. I'm just gonna, that's one line across.
Yep,
But I think it's worth doing, and adding then includes all sources of income,
Absolutely.
correct.
because that's
Absolutely.
really important for people to know.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
Okay.
I agree.
And then the minimums and maximums is, I think that just tiers of 100, 200, 300 make sense.
Yep.
Obviously not to exceed the liability for that fiscal year. And for our next meeting, how are we all looking for the first Thursday in June? That'll be June 6th.
I can do that, if that works for everybody.
Because I believe the selectmen's meeting would be the 12th,
Following
which
week.
I can present to them then,
Yeah,
if we were able to, at the very least, nail down what our application timeline window is gonna be, just because that's the most time-sensitive one, if we want to get it on the tax mailing for this
Yeah.
year.
Yep.
That would give me enough time, because I suspect, I don't have an appointment yet with our bill printer, but I suspect it will probably be around the 24th, 25th,
Okay.
that'll go out. That's about my suspicion.
I'm just triple checking.
I have to have the
Space is
affidavit of mailing
available.
stamped by,
So the
June
Commission on
29th.
Disability meets here, that day at 5 PM.
at 5 PM.
Yes, and Jonathan, are you on that board still?
I'm not a board member any longer, but I am a liaison, so I will be
Okay.
here.
So,
Actually, wait, stop. We're not meeting June 6th, we're meeting June 13th.
oh, okay.
No, there we
So the
go.
town
Because
website is not
Because
updated.
Kevin will be away on June 6th.
Oh, perfect, so
So
we
I
we
think-
go
Oh.
flip-flop.
Bill, are you available on June 6th at 4 PM?
I'm gonna make a blanket statement that, this is my work time, and so I have to zoom in. You can't see my face, but I will try to zoom in if I can.
What
Okay.
time, should we look at changing times?
4 is good.
Okay.
If you want to do this.
And that works for me.
Great, so I will now
Sounds good.
entertain a motion to schedule our next meeting for Thursday, June 6th at 4 PM.
So moved. Sorry.
Motion made and seconded, any discussion?
We have to do a roll call because Bill's,
Yes, hearing none, roll call votes, please, because we have a member participating remotely from Zoom. That means to please state your name before your vote.
Trista Tate, aye.
Jonathan, I.
Laura Maderas, aye.
And Bill's eye.
And Paul's aye.
Awesome. Just as a point of order, we did miss 4B about, the ways to promote. We
Oh,
didn't
yes.
necessarily touch on it. I know we did last time. Is that just something we can continue to next meeting?
Yes, I would say that that's something that we can continue till
Do we
next
need a
meeting.
vote on that?
No, I don't believe so.
Okay,
No, and we sort of discussed it because we were talking about Eller,
true.
so we kind of.
We did touch on it
kinda
without
touch on it.
needing to touch on it.
And
Yeah.
any public input? All right, hearing none, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
I motion we adjourn
Jonathan,
at
aye.
5:29 PM.
All right, motion made.
Second,
Seconded. And roll call vote.
Jonathan, I.
Bill, aye.
Laura, I.
Paul is an aye.
Thank you, Bill.
Everybody, bye-bye.
Very much, we really appreciate it.
Well, you got a lot done, really. There was
Yeah,
a lot
absolutely,
done
this is a
today.
great meeting.
Thank you guys so much.
Thank you all very much.
Absolutely.
This is what I would definitely have called a working meeting,
Yeah, absolutely,
right into it.
absolutely. This was